Today we're also going to split it up a little bit. Rod has some more information to share with you, so he'll take the last part of the class because he won't be with us next week. He is taking an adventure to the Canary Islands, and so he won't be here. So if you want to know about why he's going to the Canary Islands, you need to talk to him about that. But he'll have the last 30 minutes, so we'll take a late break this morning. I know I won't be able to get through all my slides today, so we'll finish up next week and wrap everything up with a kind of a look at modern cotton production and the agricultural situation in Alabama as it exists today. But last week, we finished up by introducing you to the boll weevil that devastated the cotton, and hopefully you had a chance to look at the little bulletin that Dr. Ron Smith had on the table in the back. Like I said, he is the authority on the boll weevil in Alabama. There's probably in the whole country, there's no one with as much experience and information about the history of the boll weevil and the efforts that it took to eventually eradicate it. And if you need to know, if you want to know more about that, just talk to Dr. Ron Smith in the back of the room. We also had finished up the day talking about the effect of Dr. George Washington Carver and the peanuts on Alabama. Peanuts had been here. Farmers have been growing peanuts for decades. They actually came from South America via Africa, and the slaves that were brought to Alabama brought the peanut with them. So we had grown peanuts. They were used to fatten hogs, just turn the hogs in on them and they could dig up the peanuts. We roasted them, we boiled them, but it wasn't until Dr. George Washington Carver did his work with peanut butter and 100 other products that they really became a commercial crop for the state of Alabama, and it showed farmers that they really did need to start rotating their crops, and peanuts was a good rotation crop for cotton. After I went home last week, Sonny Dawsey sent me a link to audio that I've been looking for, and I really did not know how to download it, and he showed me how to download it. So I'm going to bombard you with videos and music today because I have finally learned how to download them from the web. So the first one is a nice little entertainment which we all remember from years ago. Let's see. There we go. Yeah.
It's right on the tip of your tongue.
I can't. Ask Sonny. But if you type in boll weevil song, that's the first one that pops up. Jim just asked me that. Okay, thank you, Sonny. I should have included it on the slide. Come on. I'm not getting any response down here. Oops, no, because I was hitting the wrong button. That's why I wasn't getting a response. Okay, so we were all right. We were moving on from the boll weevil, and that was in 1911 when it was finally found in Alabama. And of course, by 1922, it had covered the whole cotton belt. And we know what happened. We've seen this slide before about how the production of the acreage of cotton dropped dramatically. Yields dropped. That's a pretty dramatic drop in yields too. If you look at the magnitude there, it's about a 50% drop from the previous year by 1911, after the boll weevil settled in. There was an increase in cotton acreage. Just during the roaring 20s, cotton prices were good. The boll weevil had created its damage, and so throughout the cotton belt, so cotton prices went up, farmers planted more cotton. So, but then came the Depression, and this is kind of what we'll talk about today, the 20th century, what happened after the boll weevil was introduced and during the early and latter part of the 20th century. We won't get through the entire 20th century today, but we'll try. One thing that I have not covered really is the impact of cotton production on the Industrial Revolution and on cotton mills in Alabama, because I really don't know a lot about it. I'll just be honest with you. But I went to the web and I did find some interesting facts that you may or may not know about cotton mills in Alabama, and I thought I'd just share some of these pictures with you. As you'll see in just a moment, cotton mills had been around since well before the Civil War, but they really didn't take off until the turn of the 20th century. This is one of the oldest ones, and that's a drawing, of course, of Merrimack Manufacturing Company in Huntsville. I did not realize that Huntsville was really a center of textile mills in the early 20th century. I did not know that. I always thought it was the Tallahassee, Opelika Valley area here, and we were big, but Huntsville really probably had more cotton mills than any other city in the state at one time, and that Merrimack Mills was actually part of the Lowell, Massachusetts family of cotton mills that originally started the Industrial Revolution in America that moved south. Anniston was big. Alexander City, of course, came in. All these were around 1910 was when these cotton mills were established. One of the things that shocked me, I had known about the child labor issue in cotton mills, and this was a problem in New England as well, but it really became a serious issue here in the early part of the 20th century with child labor. You had to be at least 12 years old to work in the cotton mills. Imagine that, 12 years old. There are a lot of kids, obviously much younger than that, working in the cotton mills. They just lied about their age, and it's probably their parents. From one thing that I picked up on the web, it was probably their parents that lied about their age because they could get some extra income by having their kids work, both boys and girls. And these are most of these look to be probably 12, maybe at least 12.
Way down south where I was born, in the land of cotton and the land of corn, I saw the light on a Monday morning. They called me Dixie Dan. In an old burnt stump of an old burnt tree, the doctor, he discovered me, and my mammy just was died with me, and he called me Dixie Dan. Now a gal down there with corkscrew hair, she won my heart, and I declare I must have been slow when I let her go, and I went traveling with a minstrel show. Oh, Dixie, oh Dixie, Dixie Dan, ambling, rambling, gambling minstrel man. Cold black color, all except my teeth, with a loving disposition underneath. My heart pines for the girl I left behind. Oh, Trixie, Trixie, oh, Trixie, Trixie Ann. My heart beats for you to beat the band. Away down south in the land of cotton, tell me you have not forgotten Dixie, your Dixie Dan. Dixie, oh Dixie, Dixie Dan, ambling, rambling, gambling, minstrel man.
I thought you'd enjoy that little video that was put together by Alabama pioneers on the web, and the photographs were taken for the express purpose of trying to get some laws passed that would reduce the severe child labor issue that was occurring in the textile mills, especially in the Deep South, but also in New England as well. It wasn't just Alabama, but it was all over. But all those images came from mills around Alabama in around 1910. And so before the Civil War, there were, the best I can gather, there were about 5 big textile mills in the state. The first one that was established was Merrimack in 1822. Now this really amazed me, that because that's about the time they were just getting started in New England, and yet we had one in Huntsville, that a branch of Merrimack Industries that had started a textile mill in Huntsville. And then Dwight Manufacturing Company in Gadsden, American Net and Twine Company in Anniston, Pratt Cotton Mills in Prattville, and this was about the same time that Pratt established his cotton gin industry in Prattville. And then in 1852, the Tallahassee Falls in Tallahassee, and that's the old mill that you see when you cross the bridge going into Tallahassee that's falling apart, not the one that burned, but the other one that has been all but dismantled there in Tallahassee. So Tallahassee was an antebellum center of textile mills, but there were only 5 before the Civil War. After the Civil War, 5 more, between 1865 and 1895, more were added, and including one in Montgomery and in Union Springs and in Lynette in our part of the country. And of course, you see, by this time there were 3 in Huntsville. And then between 1891 and 1899, 13 more new mills were established in Alabama. And then this is the remarkable thing. The next 15 years, 43 new mills were established from 1900 to 1915, 43 new mills, and you can see most of them were in East Alabama, but they were scattered all over the state, from Mobile, because Huntsville was really the center of textile mills in Alabama. Birmingham later only had 1 mill at this time, but later there were other mills established. I don't think any of these mills are in existence today. In fact, I'm almost 100% sure none of them exist, either with the original names or another name. I think they've all gone. In fact, are there any textile mills left in Alabama? I don't know of any. You think there may be? In the last 20, 30 years, they've all left the state. But at this point in time, this was the peak of cotton production in Alabama. We had 4 million acres of cotton, and so the mills were very anxious. This is just Alabama. South Carolina, Georgia, and North Carolina had even more mills than we had. So you can imagine that was the industrial activity of the South. Other than the fledgling steel industry in Birmingham, the textile mills, that was the industrial South at this time.
Bill Deutsch told us that those mills were established at fall lines. But I didn't know there were fall lines.
Not all of them. Not all of them were. Of course, before the Civil War, those certainly were where they could get water power. But I was amazed at the number of ones in the early 20th century that was steam, and even a few electrical-driven mills. So they weren't all on the fall line, but certainly the mills in the valley around Tallahassee and up in Gadsden and Anniston were probably water powered. And I'm not sure about the ones in Huntsville.
I don't think they were on the fall lines.
They're not on the fall line, no, because the fall line actually extends from about Florence through Tuscaloosa and over to the valley. That's the fall line.
The importance of the fall line was not just the direct generation from the water, they were producing electricity at those falls.
Yes, they were, yeah.
So that was why they were.
This website where I got information from listed them as how they were powered: water power, steam power, or electrical power. But Sonny's right. Yes, Jim?
The other thing would be that you're going to transport those cotton by boat. Fall line's about where you're going to have to stop.
Yeah, if you were bringing it upriver, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Do any of you remember in the 1950s a TV show called Industry on Parade? Yes, I used to love that thing because there wasn't much you could watch in the 1950s on TV, but I was just fascinated being on a farm. Well, I found this little video clip, and it actually, I thought it has some very good pictures of what it looks like inside of a textile mill. So I think you'll get a kick out of this because
Industry on Parade. A pictorial review of events in business and industry, produced each week by the National Association of Manufacturers. The heart of the Cotton Belt, the Deep South. This Alabama countryside was the scene of gracious living in years gone by, and though it fell on hard times, it's proving that the climate, the soil, and the temperament of its people are as suitable for gracious living in this century as in the last. Industry on Parade cameramen arrive at the Alabama town of Sylacauga to see just how people in these parts do live. One thing certain, there's nothing sleepy about it. Same stores, same activity you'll find in any thriving, bustling American town, north or south, east or west. And you don't have to hunt very far to find one force behind the healthy, flourishing life of Sylacauga. It's a healthy, flourishing industry called Avondale Mills that takes in the raw Alabama cotton and transforms it into a variety of finished products needed by people everywhere. From the opening machines, the cotton is sent along to pickers, where it's partially cleaned, emerging in the form of a loose blanket called lap. On the card, thousands of fine wire teeth will comb out additional foreign matter and begin to lay the fibers parallel to each other. Then begins the process of drawing the fibers out. 6 strands are fed onto a roll that moves just 6 times as fast as the feeding rolls. And after being drawn and spun again and again, the yarn is finally ready for the looms. Large rolls will feed the warp or lengthwise strands, while the crosswise or filling yarns are laid in by bobbins that shuttle back and forth as the warp yarns are raised and lowered. This particular fabric is corduroy, and disc blades cut the grooves called wales. Now into the sanforizing machines that'll pre-shrink the fabrics. It's in this way that many of the people of Sylacauga spend their working days, applying special skills to the handling and processing of a fiber that's special to their part of the country. And for that matter, the town of Sylacauga and Avondale Mills are something special too, for they've created more than just another boom town. Here the roots go deep. The Comer family that founded Avondale Mills wanted things like swimming pools for the kids. It wanted pleasant accommodations for visitors. It wanted a good library to open new worlds to seeking minds. It wanted the finest medical care attainable for every member of the community. Not only attention for the sick, but preventive medicine for the healthy. The best there was. Juvenile delinquency, hardly among boys like these, boys whose natural vitality finds a natural outlet and wins awards for achievement. Yes, it was inevitable that a prosperous industry would help bring prosperity to everyone in town. That's the way things work. Not only do literacy rates go up and sickness rates go down, but there's enough left over for what some people might look upon as plain frivolity. But where the roots really go deep are in the home. And thanks in large part to a company financing program, today, 85% of Avondale employees own their own homes. Many of them are farm homes, where the owners grow food for their own tables and find a happy combination of the best in city and country life. Truly a company that's found a partnership with the people.
All right. I wish I had grown up in Sylacauga. Gosh. And was Opelika the same way? I assume it was. But I thought that was kind of fun when I found that video. Thanks to Sonny and his inspiration to locate these. Well,
How many hits were there to that?
it's actually, I'm not sure where I found that on the web, but it was fun. Okay, we're now back in the early part of the 20th century. Peanuts had been introduced, but actually before the boll weevil came into Alabama, there was a lot of effort by the researchers at Auburn primarily, but at other land-grant universities across the South, and at Tuskegee, to find new crops, complementary crops that could help with the problems that we were encountering with this monoculture of cotton that had been going on for at least 100 years now. We knew that cotton had to be rotated, but getting farmers to do it was difficult because cotton was an easy cash crop to grow. I saw this in one of Professor Duggar's books, and later found out that Auburn actually did a lot of work with growing hemp in Alabama, cannabis sativa, if you understand the scientific name. We know it more as marijuana today, but they grew it primarily for ropes and for oil from the seed for non-medicinal purposes. And there was a bulletin from Auburn University in the 1940s about growing hemp in Alabama, and there's a lot of interest in it today as well. Kentucky, all of our hemp for our rope and fabric too can be made from hemp. But all that is being imported from Canada now because technically the U.S. government has a ban on growing cannabis sativa. Now there is a low, what is the chemical? TFC, yeah, low TFC hemp, and of course the high TFC we call marijuana. But Kentucky is doing a lot of work with it, so is Wisconsin and Minnesota. But right now we are not doing any in Alabama because our state legislature won't allow it to be done. Furthermore, the U.S. government will give you a waiver, but they haven't, our legislature has to ask for it, for research to be done with hemp in Alabama. But we know it'll grow, and it'll grow well. That's supposed to be background music. Other crops, peaches were introduced about the turn of the century. These were in actually the only photograph, it said Bullock County. That's Union Springs. I did not know they grew commercial peaches there. Of course, we think of Chilton County today as the peach center of Alabama. But peaches were grown. Before, around 1920, there were over 10,000 acres of commercial citrus in Alabama. Imagine that. It was all in Mobile and Baldwin County, maybe a little bit in Escambia County. But Alabama shipped citrus all over the country. One of the first railroads extended straight down through the center of Baldwin County and ended at Foley. And those tracks have just recently been taken up, but there were packing houses all along there for shipping citrus, primarily Satsuma oranges, and other vegetables from the Mobile, Baldwin County area up north. South Alabama, even at this point in time, was mostly timberland. The coastal plains was the heart of longleaf pine, and longleaf pine had proved themselves valuable for pitch and tar, what we call naval stores, and turpentine manufacture, and they would go in and slash the trees. And I can remember driving through South Alabama as a kid, and you'd see these vast forests of these huge longleaf pines with these big slashes on them for collecting the rosin to process into to turpentine and other chemicals. Once the longleaf pine forests were destroyed, they went in and started digging up the stumps and processing the lighter that was in the stumps. I don't know where or even if we're getting any naval stores today from our pines, because the longleaf pine forests have totally been destroyed throughout most of Alabama. Yes, sir?
What are naval stores?
Naval stores is pitch, turpentine, things they use for waterproofing wooden ships. So there's probably not a need for those products anymore. I guess you can, I haven't even seen turpentine at any of this. Yes? Yeah, most of the longleaf pines, yellow pine, the state tree of Alabama, technically we say the southern pine is the longleaf pine. Those were, in the early part of the 20th century, they were devastated. Books have been written about the history of the longleaf pine, and one thing that I found fascinating was that there were so many pine trees being cut in the South, from North Carolina to East Texas, along the coastal plain region, that the market just dropped out for lumber. So what did these big timber companies do? They went in and started harvesting more, because they could not make any money off of, just like cotton farmers did. I guess you can only call it one thing, that's greed. And during that period from 1910 to about 1930, most of the longleaf pine forests in Alabama were destroyed. You can still see some down in the Conecuh National Forest. Eufaula National Wildlife Refuge is reestablishing some. There's a longleaf foundation in Alabama that's reestablishing longleaf pines. You had a comment? Yep. Mm-hmm. Right. It was a great ecosystem, and if you are interested in that, there's several books that have been written about the longleaf pine forest in the South and the impact it's had. The town of Brewton, Alabama, is a sawmill town. It got established there on the river for the simple reason they could float the logs down to Brewton and process them there. And so that's how Brewton, and a lot of other towns in South Georgia, some of the towns along the Flint River were there because of the longleaf pines. And they used, until the railroads came along, they had to use the streams and the rivers to get the logs down to a mill where they could saw them. Yes, ma'am.
I read that part of the reason for the demise of the longleaf pines was suppression of forest fire, because that's critical for their regeneration.
Yeah, that's right.
That wasn't understood.
And up until this point, this part of the state, South Alabama, was not a big cotton producing area. There was cotton grown there. Once they cleared the land, they grew cotton because they didn't have anything else to do with the land. The land was worthless, so they grew cotton. But up until that point, these were very sandy, acid, infertile soils. Great for growing longleaf pines, but pretty poor for growing annual crops like cotton and corn. It was also in these piney woods of South Alabama, and we're really talking about the area from Auburn, Opelika south now. Cattle production was almost exclusively in this area. I can even remember my grandfather having cattle along the swamps of the Tombigbee River. He just let them go. There was open range at that time. If you grew a crop, you had to build a fence to protect your crop. The cattle were allowed to graze wherever they wanted to. And that open range law stayed into an existence in parts of Alabama until the 1950s. Covington County was the last county to get rid of the open range law in Alabama. That's because that was the livelihood of the piney woods of South Alabama. Cotton was not a major player there. You heard of cracker cattle, mostly associated with Florida cracker, Georgia cracker, but these were the cracker cattle, same as the Texas Longhorns. Exactly the same animal. Tough animals that can survive in these piney woods eating whatever they eat in the piney woods. Not much, but they can survive. I say eating sweet gum trees and hickory nuts, probably. You see, all these pictures that I'm showing you now came from Covington County, this is Baldwin County. Actually, I think they're harvesting, that would be harvesting timber using the oxen. And the oxen are the same, just a steer that's been trained to pull a wagon. Livestock auction in Bay Minette, Baldwin County, 1910. And I thought that was that was actually copied off of a postcard, touring the sunny South. That's a tough way to have to tour the sunny South. But then the late teens, the early 20s, as we said, things started to get a little bit better for those that could continue to grow cotton because cotton prices improved considerably. And so the next couple of pictures, we started diversifying a little bit. Turning pigs into your corn or into your peanut fields to take advantage of what was left over. I grew up in Marengo County, and of course, Johnson grass is what put me through college. It was the staple crop of the Black Belt at this time. In fact, I'm told that Johnson grass hay was shipped out of West Point, Mississippi, and points along the Tombigbee River to support the troops in World War I and in World War II, where horses were still important. That sound. Do you know the story of Johnson grass? The story that I've heard is there was a plantation owner near Marion Junction, Alabama. That's just west of Selma in the 1840s, because of the cotton plantation. He was good friends. His name was Andrew Johnson. He was good friends with the governor of South Carolina. And he made a trip to South Carolina and visited with the governor there in Charleston, actually. And the governor had just returned from a trip to the Mediterranean. And he had brought back with him this remarkable little plant that he was growing in his garden. and it was a sorghum plant. It would get pretty tall, and it seemed to thrive in South Carolina. So Andrew Johnson got a few cuttings from the governor of South Carolina, brought them back to his plantation on those black clayey soils over in West Alabama. And lo and behold, it's like the boll weevil, it found a home. And it thrived in those clayey soils, and eventually that plant there became the basis for the cattle industry in Alabama. Once the cattle moved out of the piney woods and we cleared all the trees there, the Black Belt area Montgomery County, Lowndes County, Dallas County, Marengo, Perry, Hale, Sumter, Greene counties, that area of the state where you have these black soils that used to be used for cotton production, but they've pretty well worn them out up until this point. Now, this Johnson grass just took over and grew like crazy, and that became the basis for the cattle industry. And when I was growing up in the 1950s, we thought nobody could grow cows as well as we could in the Black Belt. In fact, Marengo County, which is my home, we were number 3 in the state at that time in total cattle production. And it was all because of Johnson grass, the fact that you could graze it in the summer and make hay off of it. And as long as you had a legume to grow with the Johnson grass, you did not have to fertilize it with nitrogen, and you could make a pretty good crop of hay. Things were really developing rapidly because of research being done by Auburn, and by the 1928, we had research stations on all the major soils of Alabama throughout the state, and this is harvesting clover seed by hand, but we still had this problem through the Depression that we talked about the other day about erosion. Even though we knew how to control it, you couldn't force the farmers to adopt practices. It was their land, they owned it, they could do with it what they wanted to, but it was causing real problems. We knew about the problems here in the South, but it wasn't until the 1930s and the Dust Bowl that really got the attention of the leaders in Washington. You've seen these pictures before. These were all taken in the Piedmont, no less. Some of the best soils in the country were in the Piedmont until we started trying to farm these hills, and it all washed away. Did I tell you the story about the farmer in Chambers County? I don't think I did. I was doing a program about, maybe 10 years ago up in Chambers County in Lafayette, and I mentioned the fact that the Piedmont, there's been severe erosion in the Piedmont over the years, probably more so than any other part of the state. But this one farmer raised his hand and he said, you know, I was doing some backhoe work down in the creek bottom below my house. And you know what, I dug down, I don't know why he was doing backhoe work, but he said, I dug down about 8 feet, 10 feet deep with that backhoe, and you know what I found? Pine stumps that had been sawed off. 10 feet deep. How did those pine stumps get down there so deep? Well, you know, when you have this kind of erosion, and that soil has to go somewhere, and it flows off the hills, accumulates each year a few inches in that bottom, and the creek gets deeper, and the banks get higher and higher. And those pine stumps that were cut off probably in the 1920s, 1910, 1920s, are now under 10 feet of what used to be topsoil. So it was a severe problem in Alabama. But it wasn't until the Dust Bowl that really got the attention. I could not find a video about erosion, water erosion, but I did find a lot about the Dust Bowl.
During World War I, the demand for wheat to support Allied troops encouraged farmers to plow under the grasslands and plant huge wheat crops. After years of excellent crops, livestock was finally allowed back to graze. Their hooves pulverized the unprotected soils. This, along with several dry years with little rain, turned the soil to dust. In 1934, strong winds blew the soil into huge clouds of dust that blocked the sun for days, smothered crops, destroyed pasture lands, and in some places could bury a barn in 3 to 6 feet of dust. By the late 1930s, the Dust Bowl covered more than 25,000 square miles. Millions of acres of farmland were devastated, sending hundreds of thousands of farmers and their families to the cities for work. Many of these people left behind nearly everything they had for unsteady jobs with long hours, hard work, and little pay. The Dust Bowl era lasted nearly 10 years. When it was finally over, the farmers of the area had learned some valuable lessons. Prairie grass was planted on large areas of land once more, and farmers began to rotate their crops to give the land a chance to rest.
And that's what this severe drop in cotton acreage in the 1930s here was due to finally the fact that they could not farm any more of this land, and people were destitute. So the acreage dropped, and so did the yields. Even though we've seen some increase there up until about the 1930s, the cotton yields also increased. But it wasn't until the Dust Bowl that really woke up America to the challenges of what we were doing to our land. And from that point on, then the Roosevelt administration, I guess this is probably one reason the South was so endeared to Franklin D. Roosevelt, because he started the Civilian Conservation Corps, which was part of the Works Progress Administration in the 1930s that put young people to work. They first started off doing most of their work on public lands, the national parks, the state parks. There's been lots of documentaries. Ken Burge did a fantastic documentary on the Dust Bowl. That was just one little excerpt from that. But I credit the Soil Conservation Service as really waking up the farmers to the needs to do something. And that was established in 1935, really to get some of this effort onto the individual farms. The CCC really did not work on private farms. They worked on public lands. But this was a chance for the federal government to help farmers put in some soil conservation practices. The same practices that would work in the Dust Bowl work here on our water erosion in the east, or some of the same practices do. Of course, not all the practices prove to be beneficial, but you take the good with the bad. Dadeville was Dadeville, just north of here, is the epicenter of kudzu distribution by the Soil Conservation Service in the 1930s. That was going to be the salvation of erosion problems in Alabama and the rest of the South. Even today, we argue whether that really helps prevent erosion or it just covers it up. We think it just covers it up. But kudzu was introduced from Japan. It is a remarkable plant. It is a legume. It fixes nitrogen. Fantastic forage. But how in the world do you turn that into hay? I don't know. That's pretty amazing. We know the legacy of kudzu. We don't have to spend a lot of time talking about that. There were other crops. I mentioned crotalaria the other day. I showed you a picture of crotalaria in a peach orchard. Crotalaria was another legume that the Soil Conservation Service introduced to help control erosion. And yes, it does help control erosion. It does enrich the soil, but as I mentioned, it is poisonous, so livestock can't eat it. But livestock love kudzu. If you want to get rid of kudzu, get you some goats. Guarantee, it'll take care of it. Or even turn the cows in on it. But the new Soil Conservation Service introduced some other practices, and the Civilian Conservation Corps, really it transitioned into the Soil Conservation Corps, building erosion control structures, contour farming. We've heard all about these practices. Some of them work better than others. But at the same time, farmers were learning how to use plant nutrients, lime, and fertilizers a little bit more efficiently. The early 1900s, this was difficult. This was the only fertilizer they had. You couldn't do 4 million acres of cotton this way. I was amused when I found this illustration in one of Professor Duggar's books about 1910. In part of my career at Auburn, working as extension soil specialist, I was working with farmers trying to convince them that if you spread chicken litter, and we have a lot of chicken litter in Alabama, if you spread chicken litter, don't store it outside in the wintertime. That's an environmental disaster because all those nutrients are going to leach off in the winter rains and get in the creek. I have spent days traveling the state doing nothing more than talking about how to properly store manure in the wintertime. Then I found this in Professor Duggar's book, 1910. He was doing the same thing, trying to convince farmers to store their manure under a shed. Don't leave it outside where it could wash away with all the other nutrients. So, we knew that we have known since the late 1800s that our soils are acid in Alabama, and you can't continue farming them without correcting that acidity. Liming is essential to continue to farm in Alabama. You can get by a few years, and that's what they did in the 19th century, but in the 20th century, you can't continue farming without liming. So liming was important, but it's difficult. When you have to spread tons per acre instead of pounds per acre, it gets very difficult, but it has to be done. And technology has improved. And most of these pictures are just illustrations of early 20th century farming techniques. As you can see, we've gone from the hoe and the mule-drawn plow to equipment that you can actually ride and accomplish the same purpose. But we're still having to plow the land to grow cotton, even in the 1940s. Things started to prosper a little bit. You know, I showed this picture at a meeting over in Prattville a while back, and lo and behold, there were some farmers in the audience that recognized that guy right there. They knew him. They told me his name, but I didn't write it down. I thought that was amazing. But you know, as new technology came along, we had frustrations with it. Just like I have frustrations trying to download videos and audios off of the web, these guys had frustrations with trying to use an automobile because you didn't have any roads. So sometimes new technology means you have to go back to using old technology before you can adopt the new technology. It wasn't until really after World War II that Alabama farmers, and really most farmers nationwide, really adopted tractors on the farm. Before then, it was all mule, horse-drawn equipment. But after World War II, tractors became less expensive. Farmers were able to buy them. And the next few pictures you'll see using automated equipment on the farm. 1950s, bottom plow, turning plow. This equipment aggravated issues with soil erosion, so we really had to start implementing some of these erosion practices, because when you can move a piece of equipment like this over the land, it will wash away in a hurry if you don't adopt some practices. I can remember when my dad bought a disc harrow in the 1960s. It was an amazing piece of equipment. This is obviously an extension meeting, and these farmers are fascinated with a simple piece of equipment like a disc harrow. Then we're entering the modern era. And these are just some pictures to share with you. We call this a combine. You've heard of combines. It's just a combination machine is all that refers to. It does the harvesting, the threshing, and the threshing of the machine as you move through the field. And that was really revolutionary. It wasn't until really the 1980s and work done here at Auburn in conjunction with some farmers in South Alabama that we started to get interested in conservation tillage or no tillage, where you can grow cotton, corn, soybeans, peanuts without ever having to till the land. And this is one of the early pieces of equipment, and we still use pieces of equipment similar to this to cut a furrow, a narrow strip that you can plant into without having to plow up the entire field. Most cotton today in South Alabama is planted using this technique. But there was still one problem, trying to control the boll weevil. And most of the efforts in cotton production from the 1920s up until the 1990s really was focused on controlling the boll weevil. DDT that was introduced in the 1940s, really, to some farmers, it was a godsend, because for the first time they were able to really take care of the boll weevil. And that increased cotton production, the yield, tremendously. But as you all know, there were problems with DDT, and it was banned in 1972. Really one of the first acts of EPA. Yes, Jim?
Was the boll weevil a problem in other parts of the world where they were growing cotton?
You know, when I was over in China, they didn't know what I was talking about, and I offered to share some with them. But
Charlie, I might could address that.
yeah, I figured you could.
They are in South America now, and cotton-producing areas, but that's only happened in the last 20 or 30 years. But the other parts of the world, Australia, Asia, the Middle East, the boll weevil has never been there. They originated in Mexico. That's the reason they were in our country first. And
if you remember, that's where Gossypium hirsutum originated, in that area of Mexico. A few words about some ag chemicals. One of the first herbicides, DDT was one of the first really broad-range insecticides that we used. And Carmex, which probably doesn't mean anything to most of you, but it does to those of us in agriculture, was one of the first broadleaf weed controls that you could use on cotton. Just spray it on the surface, and weeds like morning glories and sickle pod and any of these broadleaf weeds just simply won't come up, period. And that was a tremendous leap forward, because now we did not have to use the cultivators to plow the land after the cotton was planted. Of course, we know the story of Rachel Carson. I was in high school when she wrote her book, and I did a book report on it, and that led to a 4-H project. And I guess in some ways that's the reason I'm here at Auburn today, is because of my interest in what Rachel Carson was doing in the 1960s when we were spraying DDT all over the countryside. But man is a part of nature, and his war against nature is inevitably a war against himself. It took a lot of us a while to understand that, but that's kind of like a driving principle of most of the work that we're doing today. But you know, in 1960, we were still picking cotton by hand. We've made a lot of progress. Pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, planting techniques, but we were still dependent on hand labor to pick that cotton. I estimate that probably about 1 million Alabamians' livelihood centered around that annual cotton harvest. In the 1950s, 1960s, about 1 million people, mostly black, but there were a lot of whites too, but mostly blacks, particularly in the Tennessee Valley and the Black Belt of Alabama, depended on some part of their family's income from the annual harvest of cotton.
Charles, so they would have been hand picking in those fields that had been sprayed with DDT?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Hey, DDT was used to control head lice during World War II. It was used to control mosquitoes, everything. You know, those folks that went to labor in the fields picking cotton dreamed of having an automated way of doing it. There had to be some way that was easier than bending over and picking those bowls one by hand. I was surprised to find that one of the first mechanical cotton harvesters was actually invented in Montgomery, Alabama. And this picture is of the Warswick Hart cotton picker, the only, I'm having a hard time reading that, the only practical and successful cotton picker in the world. Demonstrated the State Fair from Dallas, Texas, 1908. Manufactured by the Warswick Hart Harvester Company, Montgomery, Alabama. Obviously, that harvester didn't catch on. What it looks like to me is it's a giant vacuum cleaner. And these guys were out there having to suck the bowls off the cotton. And of course, you probably got a lot of trash with it. So it was not exactly successful. The first successful cotton picker, what we'll call a spindle type cotton picker that literally pulls the fibers off the cotton, was demonstrated in the 1940s. Not many people bought it. It was single row picker. You can see one being demonstrated here probably about 1940. By 1950, a few of these type pickers were available on the market. Again, not too many farmers could afford it or wanted to. They didn't do a real good job. This was probably one of the first really mechanical cotton pickers that became popular. Auburn University has the very first of this type cotton picker that was purchased in Alabama, and it was bought by the McLemore family on this side of Montgomery, and they donated it to Auburn about 20 years ago, and it's in storage. It hasn't been restored, but the one that you may have seen harvesting the cotton out here is very similar to this one. It's just a more 1950 version, and we have one that has been restored, looks very much like that, and we used to harvest the old rotation and the experiment back here. Yes, Sonny?
You may be going to talk about this. What was the advantage of this one? What made it more useful?
The design of it and the fact that one thing is it mounts on a Farmall M tractor, which was, again, a popular tractor that farmers already owned. They didn't have to buy another tractor just to use the cotton picker. That may have been an impetus behind this one being popular. But time to take a break, but just go through these really quickly. By 1970, we had 2-row cotton pickers. We were able to harvest the cotton, dump it in wagons, haul it to the gin. By 1980, you can see what the improvement. 1995, 4-row cotton pickers. These are module makers. They can dump the cotton into this machine here, pack it into a huge bale, and then a truck can come along and pick that bale up in the field and take it to the cotton gin. So no more handling cotton by hand. 2000, we're up to a 6-row cotton picker, and by 2012, we now have these big 6- and 8-row cotton pickers with a module maker in the back of it. It's like a big bale of cotton. They can drop that off at the end of the field, and then a truck will come along, pick up that module, and carry it to the cotton gin. And that much seed cotton would probably translate into maybe 1 or 2 bales of ginned cotton. Okay, I'm going to leave you with this thought here. By 1970, about 90% of Alabama's cotton crop was machine harvested. We went from almost 100% hand harvested in 1960 to almost 100% machine harvested in 10 short years. There, an incredible revolution. Those million people were out of a job. It was during this era, for other reasons, but I'll just throw this at you to think about. This displaced millions of sharecroppers and part-time labor, and we also had a lot of social unrest in the South, and a lot of immigration from Alabama to New York, Cleveland, Chicago, Philadelphia, leaving the South looking for work and to get away from the social situation that existed here in the South. This is a good place to stop. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll finish up next week on this, and Ron will take over after the break.
You all here in there? Okay, good. Let's start. All right. One thing I tell you all is that I will not be present next week. Something has happened. I'll be across the Atlantic. So I regret very much not to be present. But I guess Charlie and I figured it out that he would miss the first day, and I would miss the last day. So anyway, I want to thank you all. This has been a great experience for me. I think for all. And remember, I said that this was going to be traveling in time and space, and we learned, and it has been an experience. I learned a lot. I hope we all shared in this exploration of King Cotton, and there is a lot more that we could do many courses and never finish King Cotton. But anyway, the last time we talked about the land and human labor and all that, and the space, and all of that was set so that they could move west. And we also touched a little bit about how cotton depletes the soil, and this depletion in a way forced the movement west, looking for new lands where to grow this beautiful and very profitable crop. So I'll pick up what I left there, and today we'll be discussing what I call the English and foreign trade. We'll touch into discuss a little bit about the export-import of cotton in U.S. and England, the English textile machinery, the development of it, the proletarization of labor, wage earners, okay. And then we go into the Civil War and the cotton famine, as the English called it. If you plot the United States production of cotton and the import of cotton by the English, this is what you get from 1790 to the 1860, the beginning of the war. In actual fact, it looked like this. The production figure for the U.S. was for all exports. But if you then slice it into what actually was destined for the English, they looked more like this. And he peaked and he was going this way. All right? For all their enthusiasm about the new cotton crop from the southern United States, some British investors had reservations. The first one is the United States could siphon off ever increasing amounts of cotton to its own factories. This actually happened. Okay. Second, continental manufacturers will acquire a rising percentage of the world's cotton. The French, the Italians, and so on, well, they learn how to do cotton too. Okay. And then the increasing uncertainty of the continuance of the slavery system. This was in their minds. You know, this was like good investors. What will happen? You know, so. The British, the fact is, with some good reasons, because they had invested a lot of money developing the machinery, in organization and management of the labor force. Bear in mind, this is kind of a revolutionary. Up to then, up to the time when in Manchester and Liverpool, all this machinery and so on was being done, up to that time, most of the English labor actually didn't exist. It was a cottage industry, what we would call family farms, that kind of thing. So to speak of proletarians, that is wage earners, they didn't exist, or very, very, very few. The marketing of their products worldwide, okay? So it was a change. There was a drastic social change here. They had learned how to, through the East India British Company, okay. The large numbers of their citizens were involved in the business at all levels. So politically, this was important to understand. We have a romanticized figure here of what went on with cotton, and some get really romantic. I don't know what this guy's doing here. And okay. And it wasn't anything like that, but it probably looked more like that or what Mahatma Gandhi is doing over here, okay? But there was this romantic idea, all right. And then you took it to the loom, and here you go, and the various kinds, until these guys arrived. These guys arrived. So what I'm trying to pose is there actually was a problem. On the one side, you had all these people doing the traditional cottage industries and so on, and on the other side, there were these people. And very important was James Hargreaves. He's responsible for developing the mechanism for spinning. First step. Then Sir Richard Arkwright, who was very much a sir, and he would let you know immediately that he was a sir, okay, was that kind of individual. Arkwright's achievement was to combine power, water power in the later steam, machinery and semi-skilled labor, and the new raw material of cotton to create mass-produced yarn. You see, now the cottage industry required skills, okay, which you acquired as you grew in the family and so on. That was no longer needed. What they needed is just unskilled labor. And you see here, combination of water power, and he created the factory system. The factory system. We think of Ford, the assembly line, and so on. This guy did it. So he had it all organized. You do this, you do that, you do that. And you take this guy out of the street in about, in a short time, you have him working. Okay. And this guy put it all together, and they call it the spinning mule. And if you look at this machinery, each piece of it, it's not that complicated. It really isn't, which meant that anybody could copy it. Not only the English, we did it too. So the English suspicion that more and more of the cotton was going to come to us into Italy, into France, and so forth. So in summary, you have Hargreaves, he does the spinning jenny. Then Arkwright, the water frame. And this guy puts it all together and calls it the spinning mule. To repeat, English textile was mechanically relatively simple to understand, copy, and operate, permitting rapid industrialization of cotton manufacturing. That happened. Summarize. Labor did not have to be specialized or particularly skilled. It just had to be cheap. Conversion of free men from cottage or home textile operations into wage earners. I call it the proletarization of the workforce. Clothes, textiles produced in a standardized manner were abundant and inexpensive, and with time, of better quality than those produced by traditional cottage or village method in Britain, India, and elsewhere. The English machinery, I repeat, was copied and even improved in the US and in other places. Okay? Concomitant with this improvement, improvement in transportation, steamships, and railroads, communication by telegraph. This is another revolution. Made commercial transactions almost instantaneous. We're talking about the 19th century, the 1800s. This happened. So you could put an order in Australia for so much, cloth of this type and this type. That order would be within hours on your way. This is new. This is due to cotton. So when we talk about the cotton steel revolution, there was more to it than just the machines and so on. There was all these complex things that happened because of cotton. Steel was secondary. It managed to create great opportunities and wealth. It was not understood, though. These are massive amounts of profit, massive amounts of money being made. They didn't know how to handle it. It had never happened before. Okay? So you had social inequalities building in nations. There had always been social inequality, noblemen and men, the rest, and that kind of thing. But there was not so much dependence now on wages. That was new. Not understood. So I call it trouble in the pea patch. The background music is the Internationale, a beautiful, if you know what it's a beautiful hymn marching song. Once you, and I'm sure most of you have heard it, you can't let it go. But it is an anthem that has no lyrics, that doesn't have a set lyric. You see, you write one according to where you are and your situation. Here's an English version. Like I said, there was trouble in the pea patch. Stand up, all victims of oppression, for the tyrants fear your might. Don't cling so hard to your possession, for you have nothing if you have no rights. And it goes on and on. And there is a Spanish version, there is a Mexican version, and they all were direct. The point I'm making is, boom, it exploded. 1848, revolutions all over, uprisings all over. I can arguably say that a lot of that was due to cotton. This lack of understanding that inequalities were being created. So now we have cotton as a driver for social change. You know, it made machinery, it made new industries, it brought in new crops and so forth. Well, it was a driver for social change. You know, it caused people to recapacitate, to think, what's going on here? Okay. What else now? You have enough, now we have the American Civil War. And one of the things was the Anaconda Plan, federal blockade of all southern ports and coastals. That complicated cotton production and certainly merchandise. We all know about this guy, Winfield Scott, and that is of the time, the Anaconda. Okay. And there was, unfortunately, a lot of knowledge being acquired in other things. One of them was a rifle cannon. Early in the war, very early in the war, the Federals came down Savannah and took this fort. And they took it very quickly because bricks don't do well with that. Sherman later takes the place. In fact, the Feds didn't even bother to go into Savannah. They just left it there, took the fort. They had the place strategic because there's no point in wasting men in taking the city. When Sherman got there, he had his famous Christmas gift to Lincoln of 25,000 bales of cotton, which meant that the Anaconda plan had worked because they had been sitting there and they couldn't ship it out. To His Excellency, this is the actual message to Lincoln. I beg to present you as a Christmas gift the city of Savannah with 150 cannons on and also 25,000 bales of cotton. That was a lot of money. Okay. Okay. So the English again. These crazies have gone to war. Okay. There is no cotton available, the Anaconda plant. What are we going to do? Well, we look around for other places. Okay. Brazil. Brazil had in Pernambuco, which is the original Portuguese, the first colony or settlement, and they had cotton growing in there. So then the English began, this is a percent of Brazilian production. Here's the dates, excuse me. And you see how it increased is 1860, excuse me, 1860, 6.2%. Between 61 and 70, it jumped up to 18%. And then it went down, but never quite went out after that. So where there wasn't cotton, now there was cotton, okay? Egypt. This is a great guy, the Khedive Mehmet Ali, a great man. Before anything happened, he had the idea of growing cotton in Egypt. There was no cotton being grown in Egypt. This happened in the 1840s. So when the Civil War comes, the cotton famine, as the British called them, happened. They began getting cotton from Egypt, which was, remember, within the Ottoman Empire. Okay. So production went from 120,000 in 1861 bales, then to 164,000 in 62, and a little over 250,000 in 1863. And Egyptian cotton was of good quality, and when the war ended, it went down a little, the production, But Egypt since then has been a producer of high quality cotton. It was produced here in southern Egypt and Sudan, and the Sudan. The most fascinating thing is what happened in India. India, remembered, I said that cotton was always in India. You know, they always had cotton. So the government, quotation mark, if you can call that a government, because really what in India was sort of a predatory system. It wasn't even a colony. I call them machinations of the East India Trading Company. And later the British government controlled Raj, that's the government. So mismanaged and corrupted Indians, indigenous governments, that they were not able to set up a production and export system for raw cotton to the grain. It was a failure. And this is cotton production today. At that time, it was here. The problem they had was that the Indians had a pretty good system, you know. They produced very high quality clothes, really calicos, very high quality, which they could sell and did indeed sell throughout southeastern Asia, Indonesia and so on. They had it all figured out internally, and then they exported to there. So here come the English. No, you don't want to do that. You just give us the raw cotton, we'll do it for you in Liverpool. That didn't work out, okay? So in this part, we have the British investors had concerns about the long-term availability of American cotton. British had invested heavily in developing the cotton manufacturing system that they had. And they had a political problem because that had proletarized the population, so they had to keep this cotton thing going. The Americans, before they considered sources, they went to Egypt, they went to Brazil, India, Turkey, okay? But soon after the end of the war, the British reestablished raw cotton supply from the south. But things had changed, you see. Now a lot more countries were growing cotton, and a lot more manufacturers, that is systems, were outside the English. So there were textiles being made in France, in Italy, in Germany, and so forth. That didn't exist before the Civil War. Okay. Any questions? Discussion on this part? Okay. I think we, hey. Okay. Okay. I call this, the war is over, and now what? You have consideration of acreage, total yields, yield per acre, sharecropping and tenancy, migration, and then proliferation of textile manufacturing and marketing. It ends up with textile and so on, going back to the origin, to India and China. So they circle, okay? I'm going to go quickly through this because Charlie already has covered a lot of it. Like I said, we have to consider in terms of recovery in terms of harvest area, total yields, and yield per acre. Charlie already went through this, and the data analyzed says that production peaked somewhere around the little before 1910 and so on. And then it went quickly down, and you know why? The weevil showed up. So the acreage dedicated to cotton plummeted. But not the yields per acre. The yields per acre actually went exponential. Went whoop, lot there. The introduction of synthetic fertilizers, and then also new varieties, then also cropping systems, as Charlie lucidly presented, aided and helped this phenomenon. Okay. So when you calculate the amount of cotton being produced in the remaining acreage, really, we didn't lose that much because of the increased efficiency and knowledge in the production of cotton. If you look at the end of the Civil War, what was there? The plantation owners, without the slaves or the money to pay free labor force, were often unable to farm their land. They were land rich and money poor, or if you wish, labor poor. Sherman, as he moved through Georgia, had a problem was that the freed slaves, they kept following him, and he got desperate. And in Savannah, he gave the order number 5, military order number 5. They said confiscated land or land that had come to his army be divided in 40-acre parcel and distributed to freed slaves. He thought this would take care of the problem. They go in there and they'll quit following me, okay? Well, the free slaves came to believe the concept of 40 acres on a mule. And quickly practiced subsistence agriculture. Well, that's the very last thing that Washington wanted. You're in subsistence agriculture, you don't contribute anything. You're just living there, but there's nothing. Essentially, the order was quickly rescinded, and essentially all of the land was returned to former owners. And they said, well, that's kind of weird. Well, hear me out. At no time was land promised. There was emphasis on wage earning, not on land ownership. Freed slaves were reluctant to return to work in their former plantation for contract based on wages. They didn't want to do that. Fact, 1/3 to 1/2 of all U.S. exports was cotton. Cotton could not be produced without the freed slaves. Need to reestablish cotton production in view of the debts incurred by the U.S. during the war. I just read a book by O'Reilly in Killing Lincoln. In a few hours before he went to Ford Theater, there was a meeting, the military meeting, in which Grant was offering. He said, the South needs to be put back together, and we need to have production going, because the debts incurred by the government were over $3 billion of that time, and the troops had not been paid. The South was the only money making, as far as taxes and so on, segment of the country that we had, Lincoln had. Hence, turn the land back to the owners, okay, and work out something, so that the production of cotton can be kept going on. So that was what was being discussed in a military meeting a few hours before he went to Fort. Land rich, cash poor. So sharecropping, a form of agriculture in which a landowner allows a tenant to use the land in return for a share of the crops produced on their portion of land. And if you had land, you would produce it and sell it to the company store. There was a company, so it's the same thing, okay? This labor system was throughout the South following Reconstruction and lasted until mid-20th century. Under the system, laborers with no land of their own worked on farm plots owned by others, and at the end of the season, the landowners paid workers a share of the crop. Simple. Well, that was set up. And to repeat, it evolved following the failure of both. They tried contract labor. No. They tried land reform, 40 acres and a mule. No. Okay. That didn't make any sense. So it became the agricultural system of the rural South close to 100 years. Now, of course, the details of the sharecropping, that from one place to the other, from one planter or former planter to the other, but generally it overwhelmingly favored the landlord. Okay. And here's the sharecroppers. This is what you had. These people were sharecroppers. They lived like that. Okay? And they had to live like that because that was all that there was. It ended, as Charlie explained lucidly again, it ended in the mid-20th century, in part because workers left the fields for manufacturing and other jobs in southern and other cities. They could make more money there. Landowners sought new technologies. As the workers left, well, they started developing machinery, particularly the harvest, cotton harvest, and others. Okay. This migration, I've summarized it. People were migrating, whites and former slaves. They were migrating to the cities, okay? But it was the African Americans, here's the 1940, 50, 60, the whites kind of level, but it was principally the movement of African Americans towards the cities, particularly where the factories were and where they could make a lot more money than they were making where they were. Here's some figures from Mississippi. Migration was 50.7% of the migrants, a total of 916 from 1950 to 1960 were from areas where the mechanical pickers, the harvesters, and from 1960 to 70 was 53%. Okay, I'm almost. So in summary, cotton production quickly recovered after the Civil War and increased acreage, reaching a peak of about around 1910. The cotton weevil caused the acreage to plummet. The yield per acre, though, increased, and it did so exponentially with research and new knowledge acquired and advances in plant breeding and so forth. Sharecropping had become, the standard. Okay. A migration to urban areas beginning in the mid-1930s and concomitant with mechanization. So as they migrated, machinery and other advances came into play, okay? And that's it. Thank you.